You think Foot Locker collapsed simply because malls are dying? Think again. I burned $450,000 of my life savings and pledged my family home on a $1.05 million SBA loan to open 3 mall-based retail stores, only to realize we were never true business owners. We were just unpaid real estate risks for Nike and corporate commercial landlords. When you look at the glossy press releases, they tell you about direct-to-consumer pivots and changing consumer preferences, but they do not tell you about the local operators holding $1.5 million in personal liability, watching $12,000 bleed out of their bank accounts every single month while foot traffic drops off a cliff. The reality of commercial retail in America is far more brutal than any headline suggests. Before you sign a 10-year commercial lease or take out a government-backed loan to chase a retail franchise dream, look at the actual numbers that destroyed my financial life. Like millions of corporate workers grinding away 40 to 50 hours a week, I spent years dreaming of an exit strategy. After a decade working as a brand manager in corporate America, where the average corporate layoff wave impacts thousands of employees every single year, I was exhausted by the restructuring rounds, the endless quarterly performance reviews, and the illusion of job security. I wanted real equity. I wanted to build an asset I could control, generate passive cash flow, and finally step off the corporate ladder. Nostalgically, when the opportunity arose to step into retail entrepreneurship by taking over and building out 3 specialty retail locations aligned with the Foot Locker ecosystem in California, it felt like the ultimate transition. On paper, the thesis was rock solid. Retail was roaring back post-lockdown. Consumer demand for premium athletic footwear was breaking records, and these stores were situated in high-traffic, Class B commercial shopping malls across Southern California. To turn this vision into reality, the initial capital expenditures totaled exactly $1.5 million, averaged out to $500,000 per store. I drained every penny of my life savings, totaling $450,000. To fund the remaining $1.05 million, I turned to a Small Business Administration SBA 7A loan, a government-backed lending program where the U.S. government guarantees up to 75 to 80% of the loan value to the lender, but leaves the borrower fully on the hook. What the broker glossed over was the fine print, an 11.5% floating interest rate tied to the Federal Reserve's prime rate, which had skyrocketed following the Fed's aggressive interest rate hikes from near 0 to 5.5%, backed by an unconditional personal guarantee. That meant my family home, my liquid savings, and my future earnings were pledged as collateral to the federal government and the lending bank. Under federal SBA protocols, default triggers an immediate Treasury offset peripheral, allowing the government to garnish wages and seize personal tax refunds. If the business failed, I would not just lose my company, I would lose my house. The build-out costs consumed the capital at a terrifying speed. Per store, tenant improvements and physical build-outs ate $240,000. Understated, creating that signature athletic footprint required heavy structural flooring, commercial-grade LED track lighting, custom floor-to-ceiling perimeter wall shelving, and integrated anti-theft sensor security gates. Next came the initial inventory deposit of $150,000 per store. Because of brand distribution agreements, 65 to 70% of that initial inventory purchase was forcibly allocated to high-priced Nike and Jordan inventory that we had to pay up front. Point-of-sale systems, inventory management software, and security technology infrastructure consumed another $25,000 per store. Commercial landlords demanded $45,000 per location in security deposits and irrevocable letters of credit, equivalent to 3 full months of base rent. Finally, legal fees, city permits, environmental compliance, and an initial working capital buffer took the remaining $40,000. Before the doors even opened to our first customer, every dollar of that $1.5 million was gone. With $1.5 million spent and the doors opened, we thought the hard part was over. Then, the monthly operating bill arrived. The soft opening week was an intoxicating illusion. Friends, family, and curious mall shoppers poured through the doors. The registers clicked constantly, sales figures surged, and for a brief moment it felt like the corporate risk had paid off handsomely. But by week 3, the honeymoon phase evaporated. The initial rush faded, and the unrelenting reality of brick-and-mortar retail mechanics set in. Grimly, we were hit with the monthly profit and loss statement, exposing a brutal operational meat grinder designed to siphon away capital regardless of sales performance. Reflectively, consider the monthly breakdown for just one location generating a respectable $100,000 in gross revenue. The immediate hit comes from cost of goods sold, or COGS. Because our inventory structure was heavily dictated by Nike wholesale supply agreements, where standard wholesale margins sit around 40 to 50% before mandatory vendor volume adjustments, our average gross margin was capped at a razor-thin 38%. That meant $62,000 out of every $100,000 in sales went directly back to the shoe manufacturers up front. We were left with $38,000 in gross profit to cover every single operational expense. Then came the commercial real estate engine. We had signed a standard corporate triple net lease, or NNN contract. The base rent for a 2,500 square foot footprint in a Class B California shopping mall was $12,500 a month, calculated at $60 per square foot annually. But under an NNN contract, base rent is only the beginning. Landlords pass 100% of their operational liabilities directly to the tenant through NNN extras. Property taxes, building insurance, and common area maintenance fees, known as CAM fees, which in commercial retail can increase by 3 to 5% annually, added another $4,500 every single month. That brought our total monthly lease obligation to $17,000 per location, a fixed cost that never fluctuated regardless of whether our doors were open or closed. Labor expenses added another massive layer of friction. Operating a retail storefront in California meant navigating strict state labor mandates, mandatory overtime laws, and a state minimum wage that climbed to $16 an hour, with fast food and retail sector standards pushing entry wages even higher. Maintaining one store manager and 4 part-time sales associates to cover mall operating hours, typically 10 a.m. to 9 p.m. 7 days a week, incurred $11,000 per month in W-2 payroll, employer payroll taxes, and mandatory workers' compensation insurance, which in California averages roughly $2 to $3 per $100 of payroll retail risk categories. Debt service on our $1.05 million SBA 7A loan demanded $4,800 per store location each month to cover principal and interest at 11.5%. Finally, credit card processing fees, where interchange fees set by Visa and MasterCard average 1.5 to 3.5% per transaction, devoured 2.8% of top-line revenue, taking $2,800. High-capacity mall HVAC utility bills, high-speed Wi-Fi, and SaaS point-of-sale infrastructure costs consumed another $1,800. When you add up the numbers, our baseline operational expenses totaled $38,600 against $38,000 in gross profit. At $100,000 in monthly gross sales, the store was operating at a net loss of $600 per month. The underlying unit economics were unforgiving. With an average order value of $130 per pair of sneakers and a gross profit of $49.40 per unit, each store had to sell exactly 782 pairs of shoes every single month just to hit baseline break-even. That meant selling an average of 26 pairs of shoes every single day, 30 days a month, uninterrupted. According to retail analytics data from firms like Placer.ai, overall foot traffic across suburban American shopping malls has experienced persistent multi-year declines, dropping over 30% from pre-pandemic baselines in non-flagship centers. When foot traffic across our suburban California malls declined by 30%, daily sales volume collapsed from 26 pairs down to 14 or 16 pairs per day. Almost overnight, that minor $600 operating deficit exploded into a bleeding loss of $8,000 to $12,000 per store every single month. Across 3 locations, we were burning through $36,000 in cash every 30 days. Staring at a $36,000 monthly cash drain across 3 stores, I did not just sit there and bleed. I fought back with every corporate playbook strategy I knew. Faced with a monthly $36,000 bleeding cash drain across our 3 California locations, quitting was not an option. A personal guarantee tied directly to my family home meant that walking away would trigger immediate loan default, bank foreclosure, and personal bankruptcy. So I defaulted to my corporate training. I convinced myself that this was simply an operational efficiency problem that could be solved through aggressive cost-cutting, inventory restructuring, lease renegotiations, and creative secondary channel sales.
The first step in our survival plan was brutal cost elimination. I fired all 3 store managers. To eliminate their salary and benefit overhead, I took over daily operations across all 3 locations myself. My week transformed into an 85 to 90-hour marathon. I would open the first store at 9 in the morning, handle inventory check-ins, run the register, manage customer inquiries, drive through California traffic to inspect the second location, and close the third store at 10 at night. By stepping in as an unpaid general manager, I eliminated $4,500 in W-2 payroll per store each month. Combined across 3 locations, that saved $13,500 monthly, but the physical and mental toll was devastating. I had escaped the corporate ladder only to turn myself into an unpaid laborer, working double the hours for negative returns. Our second intervention was an aggressive inventory pivot. Analyzing our gross margins, it was painfully clear that Nike wholesale terms were killing our unit economics. Frustrated, a 38% gross margin left zero room for error. Determined, I made the strategic decision to reallocate capital towards emerging high-margin athletic footwear brands like Hoka, On Running, New Balance, and Asics, brands that were capturing surging market share, with Hoka's parent company Deckers and On Holding reporting net sales growth exceeding 20 to 30% year over year, offering wholesale gross margins closer to 46 to 48%. Earnestly, we cleared shelf space, updated window displays, and retrained sales associates to push these higher margin alternatives. Disappointedly, the strategy failed completely due to deeply ingrained consumer behavior. Resigned, customers who walked into a store in the Foot Locker ecosystem were not looking for alternative running shoes. They were coming specifically for Nike and Jordan product releases, which historically accounted for over 65 to 70% of total sales across the entire Foot Locker chain. Muttering, the new inventory sat untouched on the shelves, tying up precious working capital. Barely holding back anger. To make matters worse, Nike retaliated against independent operators who reduced order volumes by throttling access to Tier 1 product allocations. Documentary narrator, under Nike's aggressive direct-to-consumer initiative, known internally as Consumer Direct Acceleration, Nike intentionally reduced wholesale accounts worldwide from over 30,000 retail partners down to a select group prioritizing their own channels. They kept high-demand, high-margin, exclusive sneaker releases for their proprietary SNKRS app, which generated billions in digital revenue, and flagship direct-to-consumer stores, leaving independent mall stores with low-demand, general-release inventory that sat on shelves until forced into discounted clearance bins. When operational tweaks failed to stem the tide, I went directly to the source of our largest fixed overhead: commercial real estate. I drafted formal hardship letters to the real estate investment trusts, or REITs, billion-dollar institutional entities like Simon Property Group or Macerich that own the shopping malls. I presented audited financial statements showing a 30% decline in mall foot traffic and requested a temporary restructuring of our lease terms. The landlord's response was swift, cold, and legally absolute. The corporate asset managers reminded me that our triple net lease was an unconditional 10-year commercial contract. They stated plainly that foot traffic fluctuations were entirely the tenant's operational risk, not the property owner's purview. They warned that any failure to pay the full $17,000 monthly NNN lease obligation per location would result in an immediate default notice, acceleration of the remaining lease term payments, demanding millions in unpaid future rent instantly, and legal action against my personal assets under the personal guarantee. The real estate trusts had built an airtight legal wall, completely insulating themselves from commercial market realities while locking operators into escalating cost obligations. Desperate for immediate liquidity to service our monthly SBA debt obligations, I initiated a secondary channel clearance blitz. I started listing our backroom overstock inventory directly on online secondary marketplaces like StockX, GOAT, and eBay. The goal was simple: liquidate slow-moving inventory at cost just to generate the cash flow required to pay off bank interest and landlord rent. The math on secondary channel liquidation turned out to be another financial trap. Third-party marketplace platforms charged seller fees between 10 and 12%. Shipping and insurance costs for heavy shoe boxes across the country consumed another $8 to $10 per order. Credit card processing fees took another 3%. When subtracted from our original 38% gross margin, these platform fees and logistics expenses completely wiped out any remaining margin. In many cases, after paying seller fees and insured shipping, we were selling inventory at an absolute net loss. We were spending more money to ship and sell the inventory online than we were collecting in cash. Every strategic intervention, every 90-hour workweek, and every operational pivot collapsed against the fundamental truth: fixed cost rigidity. In a traditional brick-and-mortar retail setup, your rent, CAM fees, SBA loan payments, and labor costs are fixed and non-negotiable. When a powerful supplier like Nike cuts your wholesale margins and diverts high-demand inventory to its own direct-to-consumer channels, and the commercial landlord refuses to adjust fixed rent while foot traffic plummets, no amount of owner hustle or operational efficiency can fix the underlying unit economics. When every optimization strategy failed, I realized I was not trapped in a bad business. I was trapped in a legal and financial prison designed by Wall Street. This is the deadliest psychological trap of physical retail in America. You find yourself suspended in a financial purgatory where you cannot afford to operate, yet you legally cannot afford to quit. Attempting to liquidate your business assets offers no salvation. Specialty store fixtures, custom lighting grids, and custom display cases that cost $240,000 to install hold virtually zero resale value on the secondary market.
Commercial liquidators operating in the retail disposition sector will offer 10 to 15 cents on the dollar, leaving you with pennies against the massive capital deficit. Shutting the doors and walking away triggers an even worse legal catastrophe. Under a 10-year corporate triple net lease, abandoning the premises does not cancel your obligation. The commercial landlord, backed by institutional real estate investment trusts, can instantly accelerate the remaining contract payments, suing you for hundreds of thousands of dollars in uncollected future rent. Simultaneously, defaulting on your SBA 7A loan triggers federal debt collection protocols. Because the government loan was secured by a personal guarantee, the lending bank and the Small Business Administration move directly against your personal assets, placing a legal lien on your family home and foreclosing on your equity. You are trapped in a system designed to extract capital from you, regardless of whether your business survives. To understand why this happens, you have to look at the macro forensics of corporate retail. The modern American shopping mall ecosystem is not built to protect the independent store operator. It is a risk transfer engine constructed by Wall Street. Institutional REITs securitize commercial leases into commercial mortgage-backed securities, locking operators into guaranteed escalating cash flows that protect landlord valuations regardless of foot traffic decline. Global footwear manufacturers like Nike use independent retailers as liquidity buffers, forcing them to purchase massive inventory quotas up front, shifting all market, storage, and clearance risks onto the local operator. When direct-to-consumer digital channels become more profitable, where Nike achieves gross margins closer to 60 to 65% compared to wholesale, these mega brands bypass the middleman entirely, starving independent stores of hot releases while leaving them saddled with unsellable inventory and fixed real estate liabilities. When you see headlines about corporate parent companies selling off brand assets like Foot Locker in fire sales at 30% of their peak valuation, do not be deceived into thinking corporate executives are taking the loss. They are simply transferring accumulated toxic liabilities down the chain. The institutional landlords still collect their guaranteed NNN rent checks, the suppliers still pocket their upfront wholesale margins, and the SBA lenders still hold liens on personal residential real estate. The entire downside is absorbed by the small operator who trusted the system, drained their life savings, and signed a personal guarantee. So, after losing my $450,000 life savings and spending 3 grueling years working to pay down a restructured SBA loan debt, here is the final lesson I learned the hard way. Revenue is vanity, profit is sanity, but cash flow is absolute survival. Looking back at the destruction of my $450,000 life savings and 3 years of relentless labor, the hardest truth to accept is that hard work alone cannot fix a fundamentally broken financial system. If you are considering stepping out of corporate America to open a retail storefront, buy a franchise, or sign a commercial lease, you must protect yourself with 3 non-negotiable defensive rules. First, never sign a personal guarantee on a long-term commercial lease or loan that extends beyond your projected payback period. Pledging your personal residential home to back a 10-year commercial contract means risking your family's basic security on market variables you cannot control. Commanding tone.
Second, never invest in a business model that relies on a single dominant supplier for more than 40% of its inventory, especially when that supplier operates competing direct-to-consumer digital channels. When a supplier can control both your wholesale margins and your product access, you do not own a business. You're an unpaid agent taking all the risk for their balance sheet. Assertively, interrogate every line item in a triple net lease contract before signing. Audit the historical common area maintenance fees, demand hard caps on annual escalation rates, typically capping annual CAM increases at 3 to 5%, and hire an independent commercial real estate attorney to review the fine print.